Engage.
I have decided to come on here and I'm going to start a new project where I'm going to be trying to review every episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, which, if you don't know, is the second series of Star Trek. It was after the original series. It ran for 7 seasons. I think it started in 1988 and it ran for 7 years after that. I'm going to be starting out with the very first episode, which is a two-parter. It's called Encounter at Farpoint. I don't know if I'm going to go in order after this, because the first season, I'm not a huge fan of it. I really like some of the episodes, but I think they really hit their stride in the third season, and that's when you really start to get a good feel for the show. So I might just go through the first season and see where it goes from there, or I might just jump around, whatever catches my fancy for that day, whatever I feel like watching. I started watching Star Trek when I was like 8. I think I started in the 3rd or 4th season. I watched it pretty much every night with my family because it was just on. And I ended up watching all 7 seasons. It took a while because we couldn't really record it because we didn't have a DVR or anything. And there wasn't Netflix then. So we just would watch whenever it was on. So it took a while to get all the episodes. But eventually I did watch all of them. But I didn't watch the first season until a few years into watching it. By the time I got back to that, I was used to the dynamics, and even the uniforms were different in the first season. So I didn't really like it that much. But going back and watching it yesterday, it's actually a lot better than I thought it was. It's just different. And it kind of comes across as just kind of funny sometimes, because you think about how much it has changed and how it took them a while to get things quite right. But it is actually a really good episode. So I'm going to give a little recap for people who haven't seen it. I'm pretty much going to assume that you have watched it, because otherwise I don't think you'd be watching me talk about it. But I'll give a little recap just in case you haven't seen it in a while or something. So basically, the Enterprise has just set off. They just left the Utopia Phoenicia shipyards above Mars, and they're going to a planet called Deneb 4 to pick up the first officer and the chief medical officer. They're on the way to Deneb 4. The Enterprise encounters this supernatural, super powerful being who calls itself Q. And he pops up a lot throughout the rest of this series, but this is the first time they've seen him. And he shows up on their bridge, and he has superpowers. He freezes a guy who tries to hurt him. Basically, they can't do anything to get him off their ship. And he's telling them that humanity is the savage child race, and he decides to put them on trial for the crimes of humanity. Q decides to test them. He says, okay, I won't do a summary judgment. Go to M4, find out the mystery. I'll watch you. I'll see how you do, and at the end, this will be your test, and at the end I'll pass judgment. So he lets them go. They go over to Deneb 4. And at Deneb 4, they're picking up the first officer, William Riker, and the chief medical officer, Beverly Crusher. They notice things are weird. Things appear. Riker says he wants an apple. A bowl of apples appeared. And it's just stuff like that. And eventually it turns out this alien spaceship appears, starts shooting at the planet. They find out that this thing is a giant space jellyfish, and its mate is stuck on the planet, and they're using the mate to build their space station. The mate could transform energy into matter, so it basically was their new space station on the planet. So they free it, send it some energy, it flies up, the space jellyfish hold hands, they fly off and everything's fine. And Q says, okay, kind of reluctantly, he tells them, alright, you passed, but I'll be watching. And they fly off into the distance. So the thing about this episode, as with any pilot episode to a series, is they're really just trying to figure out what they wanted to do with the characters, how they want the different characters interact with each other, really figuring out their history, how they came to be on the Enterprise. A lot of them knew each other from before they got on the Enterprise. One kind of a couple on the ship is Commander Riker and Counselor Troi. They used to date, and then Riker ended up leaving to go pursue his career, so Troi was kind of heartbroken, so she also pursued a career. So now they're both commanders on the Enterprise together. But you don't know all this at this time. So when they first meet each other on their bridge, it's this really emotional moment where they're staring at each other. And for some reason, Riker can read Deanna Troi's thoughts in this episode. That never comes into it again. It's something about their emotional bond that they used to have, I think. But they ditched that idea after this episode. The thing that I find annoying in a lot of shows, and I think you find it in pretty much any show you watch, is there's always a man and a woman who have this tension, charged relationship. They like each other, they can't get together, and it's really a focal point of the show is, are they going to get together? Everything from Bones with Brennan and Booth to Northern Exposure from forever ago, you have just the man and the woman who you don't know if they're going to get together. A lot of times they end up not getting together. So Riker and Troi, they kind of have that because they have this history, but it's not as annoying as it is in a lot of other shows because it's not at the forefront of every single episode. There's such a large cast that their little relationship, it doesn't really fade into the background, but it's not as important. So they're co-workers, they're friends, they work on the ship together for 7 years. And it's just a very relaxed relationship, but you know that they used to have something and you don't really know if they're going to get together again. And in the movies, in the last movie, Nemesis, they eventually do get married. One of my favorite characters in the show is Data. He's pretty much the Spock character from the original series, because he's an android, doesn't have emotion, he's very logical. But in the first episode, you can tell that the writers and the actor wasn't really sure what they wanted to do with him. He has more emotions. You find out later in the series that Data has an evil twin brother named Lore, who is also played by the same actor. But Lore is pretty much insane. He has something wrong with his programming, and he has emotions. So in this episode, you notice that Data looks like Lore a few times. He smiles almost, he looks skeptical at times. Just the things he says and the emotion in his voice, which he later doesn't have, you can tell he kind of sounds like Lore. Which, again, it's not a big deal, but you can really tell that they weren't really sure how much of a computer they wanted him to be. Deanna Troi is another character that changes a lot, even from, like, the encounter in Farpoint to the next episode, The Naked Now. At the beginning, she's wearing this little mini-skirt dress thing, which is what Hoover and Nurse Chapel and all the other women wore in the original series. They tried to make it kind of sleeker, more professional, but it's still really bad because you don't want to wear a mini dress that comes to like your lower thigh. So she wore that, and they tried to make it like a unisex thing in this episode. You see a few men wearing it. I know you see one in engineering. I think you see another one just walking around the ship later of just a man wearing a mini skirt, which doesn't work at all. It barely works on a woman, and that's in a non-professional context. So even by the next episode, they scrapped that idea. They pretty much completely redid not just her appearance, but also her character, because in the first episode, well, she really feels emotions. Like, she's half Betazoid, so she always like can feel people's emotions. But in this episode, she actually seems to experience them instead of just sensing them, because at one point, she feels despair and anguish, and she gets really upset about it. She pretty much collapses. Another time, she feels anger, and you can hear the anger in her voice. So she's very much a more emotional character in this episode. Later on, she gets kind of toned down. She gets more mature about it, I think. In this episode, she really reminded me of like a 50s character, a 50s woman character in a film. They were kind of weak, helpless, ruled by their emotions. That's what she reminded me of, because she wasn't a very strong character, but throughout the series, she really kind of grows into her own more. Really, the main antagonist of this episode is Q. You have the Bandy who live on the planet. They're the ones who captured the space jellyfish. They're kind of the bad guys, but basically they're harmless. Once they lose their space jellyfish, they've got nothing. Q is all-powerful, and he is pretty much going to kill them if they don't do what he says. He has the ability to just snap them out of existence. So he is really the one that they are afraid of in this episode. So think about Q. He's part of the Q continuum. He's all-powerful. He pretty much has his fun by torturing different creatures, messing with them, like maybe killing them, just kind of making them do whatever he wants. And he tries to do that with the Enterprise. At the beginning, he seems like he hates humanity. He thinks that he calls them savage and childlike, and he thinks that they should just go back to their own solar system, stop exploring. He doesn't really explain why he feels like this, he just does. But even later in the first season, he gets more interested. He seems more curious about them. The thing about Q, he's not really a foil to the characters. He's more like an outside observer. Yeah, he goes in there, he messes things up, but really, he just thinks it's all funny. Like, to the rest of the characters in the series, the rest of the aliens they meet, the Federation is a big deal. They either respect them, or they're afraid of them and they hate them. But either way, the Federation's power it's very important to them, because they are basically either afraid of the Federation or they want to join it. Q just doesn't care. Their ships mean nothing to him. He just thinks it's funny that they're running around with their little warp drives and their phasers. He just thinks that they're basically like children. What he's really interested in is the people on the ship. He brings out what Star Trek is really supposed to be about, because The whole thing, Star Trek, yeah, it's a sci-fi show. They have aliens. They have a lot of technobabble that you shouldn't be able to understand, but if you watch the show enough, you can. But it's more than a sci-fi show. It has this deep message, all the Star Treks do, that humanity can rise above their petty differences, band together, and really evolve into something more sophisticated, but also less primal. We can move beyond our violence, and we can be more human to each other. And sometimes the episodes can get a little bit heavy-handed, I'll admit that, but overall it's a really good message. Especially in the Next Generation and the original series, where they didn't go too overboard with it. And Q, that is what he finds interesting. At first he doesn't believe them, but later he likes that about him. And he's kind of like us, I think. He's all-powerful, but he's kind of like the audience in that this is what he finds intriguing about them. And he wants to see how far that humanity can go. And yet it sounds really cheesy, especially how excited I get about it, but I really like it because it shows you who the characters are when they're put under this kind of stress and strain that they can't be put under from anything other than this annoying, all-powerful creature called Q. So when Q decides to put them on trial, he has this fake courtroom that he takes them to. It's this really big room, there's a lot of audience. They kind of remind me, I don't know if it's what they're going for, they reminded me of like the French Revolution, where people will go to watch people get guillotined. They're like that cheering, kind of dirty, really bloodthirsty crowd. And Q comes in floating on this huge chair. He has guards with machine guns one of them gets shot at one point. And it's really just this really ruthless environment. So he takes Picard, Troi, Data, and Tasha Yar to this trial and puts them on trial for the crimes of humanity. And Picard is arguing with them, even though that's not really a good thing to do because Q could kill them if he wanted. But Picard starts arguing, saying the crimes aren't against him or his crew or even the present-day humanity. They're against the crimes of their past. So Picard says, take my crew, take me, and test them, current-day humanity, to see if they're still the savage race that Q seems to think that they are. So Q decides that, okay, I'll take you up on this offer. So that's when he sends them on their way to Deneb 4 and tells them to figure out the mystery. Something that I really like about this scene is it really helps with character development. There's only 4 of them, but Picard, you really get that he is this very unbending, unwavering, strong character, and he's going to do what he thinks is right, even if it maybe does put him and his people in danger. But also, if he really thinks it's important, he is able to bend and sway a little bit. And that's pretty much what they hold with for the rest of the series. I think Picard is the character that maybe changes the least. Tasha was the one who really got some good scenes in this because she beats up one of the guards, she yells at Q saying that she grew up on a world that allowed fake trials like this to go on and she wasn't going to sit through his spiel and his whole charade saying how I'm going to put you on trial, but it'll be a fair trial. And she was saying, I won't sit through that. And it's kind of odd at times because her character does get toned down a little. At the beginning, she's really angry. She doesn't really have good self-control. And you'd think that she would if she was chief of security. But I like this episode for her because it shows her off as she's tough. Yeah, she's the chief of security, but she also has issues. And Tasha was one of my favorite characters. I don't know if it was because she was in it for such a short amount of time that she got romanticized somehow, but I really liked her. So I'm glad that Worf took over, and I'm glad that he got more scenes of the show gone, and he became chief of security, because I think he was a really good character, but I wish I could have kind of seen what they did with Tasha's character. I don't know if she would have stayed the same, if that was all that she had to offer, if she would have evolved more as it went along. And if you hadn't seen him staring creepily at me over my shoulder for the entire episode, yes, that is Humphrey Bogart.